So, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? All right. Good afternoon. Let's, yeah. Yeah, that's the correct response. So, welcome to everybody. Welcome to the 2025 Smart Growth Equity Summit. We were very excited. My name is Dustin Robertson. I work with Smart Growth America on the Thriving Communities team. Basically, all things Complete Streets. If you don't know what that is, hit me up sometime in one of the breaks. I'll tell you all about Complete Streets. And I'm joined today with my colleague.
I'm Jabin Matthew. Howdy, howdy. It's great seeing you all here today. Whether it's your first year or you've been with us for a few, we're building something powerful together. Since we have you here, I wanted to give a brief overview of Smart Growth America. Smart Growth America helps create healthy, prosperous, and resilient communities through research, advocacy, and direct community action. As you can see from the variety of logos behind us, we do a lot of things. We do housing and land use, transportation and economic development, to find solutions to the community's most pressing needs.
So here is a brief look at the agenda for today. If you've looked at the agenda, which I know you have, you will see that we have a really great list of keynotes, panels, conversations planned for you. We did some tours this morning. I hope some of you are able to join for that. And at this summit, we are really going to hear from some great leaders, doers, visionaries who are building forward towards vibrant equitable communities. Before we dive into that exciting lineup, we want to give a big thank you to our sponsors who make this event possible. So our innovation leaders, as you can see, are AARP and Pacific Gas and Electric.
Our community builders are ARIP, Low Income Investment Fund, the National Association of Realtors, and Uber.
And our equity advocate sponsors, Greater Washington and Opticos. Yes, thank you for that. Yes, we are greatly appreciative, and we're appreciative for all of you.
As you can see in the picture, there's this wholesale dismantling of the federal government that's happening. But it's more than that. As many of you know, there's an intent, at least, of a wholesale dismantling of the nonprofit sector under attack. And as you can see in the picture, they're taking it down to the studs. They're taking it down to the studs. And so when you think about the anger, the sadness and uncertainty, the worry, you have to think about, well, what are we going to do? And what's our mindset? And we wanted to share a little bit about our mindset and then kind of what we think is at least part of the way forward and how we're going to build forward, which is the theme of this event. So just, and you heard a little bit about SGA and some of the things that are going on, but I have to also mention that ultimately, this is not just about some of the normal level of things. This is a moment of existential threat, so even just the basic sense of democracy might go away. And so that's really the context. So you got to have a mindset, this is not just about whether there's just going to be housing any longer. Like the whole thing is up for grabs. Liberty and justice for all is up for grabs. So in that context, how do we navigate? And as Smart Growth America, we've always been a national nonprofit working on a nonpartisan basis. We work across all the aisles, Republicans, Democrats, independents, and whatever you call those other groups. And you can see some of the names of some of the brands, organizations, the sub-brands that you may have come in the door of Smart Growth America, but the first folks you met was, I don't know, Beth Osborne, the awesomeness from Transportation for America, or Catherine Burgess, the awesomeness who leads our land use team. But in any event, knowing that we work on a nonpartisan basis, we have to work all around the country, and we have to work everywhere. Allison, this is for you. Anybody here from call it a red state? Anybody here, Stacy, this is for you, I think, from a purple state? Anybody just have to go on Wikipedia and say, what's a purple state? It's when the state goes back and forth in terms of presidential elections, not in a way that's consistent. And anybody here from a blue state? Thank you. So if you're from a red state, a blue state, or a purple state, raise your hand. So we have to navigate this type of environment, these types of options. And so to do that, we apply a certain mindset of Smart Growth America. And I just want to talk about that and kind of how you think about how you navigate the next couple of days. And part of it goes to ultimately our North Star. Because our North Star says, can we have a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that's healthy, that's prosperous, and resilient? And I'm going to say this out loud. You notice you're at Smart Growth America's Equity Summit, but do you notice that our North Star doesn't say equity? There's some there there. There's some there there. So, what's our mindset? What's our mindset? Well, the first one is we often will talk about outputs. Like, we're going to do this thing. We're going to say these words. We're going to use these terms. We're going to get to these outcomes. The journey will look like this. But when you're in a time of existential threat like we are now, we have to get to the point to say, well, if the folks who think differently are in power, then we can't focus just on outputs. We really have to focus on outcomes. We have to be outcome oriented. We have to say, do we need to use those words to get to that outcome? Can we do this another way so this can work in a red state? It can work in a purple state. It can work with folks that may not agree with some of our core ideals, but might agree with some of the outcomes that we seek. Can we find that Venn diagram? And if we're outcome oriented, it kind of changes the game, and frankly, it gives us a roadmap on what we can do going forward, particularly in these times. So one, just being outcome oriented. But second, and I'm going to say two things here, and you're only going to like one of them. We can't, and you can't focus on you. Can't focus on you. When you're not in power, you're not in control, all branches of government, everything's under attack, the focus can't be on you. It has to be on them. And I mean them in two ways. The first of them is, who are your beneficiaries? Who are your constituents? Who are you trying to serve? Who are you trying to benefit when you do the things you do? And ask yourself in this moment, what would they say when you say, well, I'm going to say all the words I want to say, and whatever happens, happens because I believe this? What would your constituencies say? What would the people who you're trying to benefit say about that approach? Your risk profile should be no greater than the risk profile of the people you serve. And think about that from an institutional level. So it's got to be about them, the people you serve. But there's a second them that's a little harder, because it also has to be about, quote, the other side. When you're not in power, you have to seek out that Venn diagram and say, well, we may not agree on all of these particular values. We may not agree on what are the right words to use, but this outcome, reasonable, affordable transportation that connects people to jobs and services, we both agree on that. Let's talk about that. Man, I don't like to be in Annapolis, Maryland, and it's flooding in the daytime. Oh, I don't like tornadoes that are now in Alabama and they used to only be in the Midwest. Oh, I don't like 100-year storms that happen every year. Well, we could use the C word and talk about why we're there, or we could just say, let's fix that. How do we become resilient against that thing that we both don't like, which is those bad outcomes? And say the outcomes is the orientation, and therefore, if we're really going to get caught up on these words, let's just get to the point where we get to the outcomes. You know, and I know I was going to call you JD, but I won't do that in public. Jerusalem is going to say, we also have to think about, as we think about them, and this is going to be the reverse of what I just said, we also have to think about ourselves, because some of the predicament we're in is our fault. We have some responsibility, we have some blame for when we think about housing supply and how come we're so disproportionately low in how much housing we put out. Some of that is us. Them is us. So when you're thinking about what to do, you got to have a mindset that says, let's talk about outcomes. Let's not just focus on myself. Let's focus on who we're benefiting, why we're trying to benefit them, and what would they say or do. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, well, you know, it's a community-based group, and they were just like, look, I hear you on your values, but if you guys are not around, you can't help me. So again, what's your risk profile as you think about what's a core value that you have to stand on, because there are some, and then what are the things that are just words? It's navigation. It's a tactical choice for the moment. It's you do what you need to do to get to the outcomes and to survive. So that's some of the mindset. And then finally, we got to get to the way forward, because you apply that mindset and like, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? And the first thing, and I might be dating myself, anybody starts with a W, what do you see here? Somebody just call it out. Whack-a-mole. Can't believe so many people know that. Wow. First thing I'm going to say is we can't engage in whack-a-mole. We've all heard the term flooding the zone. Well, you can't run around after every single thing, read every single article, try to fight on every single issue, work on every single project that attacks all the different things. We have to have priorities. We have to say, what is our actual capacity now? What is our risk profile? What can we do and what can we get done based on who we're trying to benefit? And then focus on that. And I know at SGA, we're still having those conversations to figure out, well, what are our priorities? What are we going to focus on? And frankly, to be candid, what are we going to ignore? We can't respond to all of it. So you just got to say, we can't play whack-a-mole. There's too much. There's another nonprofit that does that all day. Let them focus on those things. So we got to have that kind of mindset. Anti-whack-a-mole. So I wanted to start with what we shouldn't do. But frankly, too, and to be candid again, I think I said it earlier, we got to survive. We got to live to see another day. So whether that's financial, that's spiritual, that's philosophical, that's word choice, that's who you partner with, that's what's said on your website, what you say in that speech. What's your risk profile in thinking about whether you will survive to see another day? Because we need to be there when the sun rises again to do the things we really want to do. And are you making choices that you're going to be around and survive? And I like this picture too because it says bend, don't break, which means that you do have some core values, you do have some red lines, you do have some roots that you will not let come out of the ground. But it also says that you bend so that you make some tactical decisions that say, in this environment, with these existential threats, I might do some things that I wouldn't ordinarily do. And we just have to be candid with ourselves to say, that's what we're doing right now. And it's just a season. This too shall pass. But while we're doing that and while we're facing them flooding the zone, we also have to plant seeds. We plant seeds as they flood the zone so that the seeds go in the water and they go everywhere. So that when the good times come, and they will come, we've planted the seeds and we're ready. But you got to be around if the seeds plant and now when things are growing. So again, survival. But as you plant the seeds, and this is one of the things I want everybody to think about for the next couple of days, what is your vision for what you want to grow? One of the things we have to do in this moment, despite the crisis, despite what's going on, is say to ourselves, what is my vision for the future? And frankly, let's not build back better. Let's build back different. If they're going to tear it down and dismantle all of these things and bring it down to the studs, then you actually have an opportunity to say, well, I never really liked those HUD financing tools anyway. What tools do I really need? Those block grants never really worked to begin with. The formula program in transportation never really worked. Reauthorization is coming. We don't want to reauthorize, we want to reimagine. And I'll end with this as a former real estate developer, and I keep mentioning they're trying to take it down to the studs. And I just wanted to say to you all that they're trying to take it down to the studs, but we are the studs. We are the ones that are holding this thing up. We are going to be the ones that when the good times come back and this is what's left, we are those studs that people are going to build upon. We are those studs so that in this room right now are other people you should know, you should look for collaborations with. Maybe they're unusual partners, people you wouldn't usually partner with, or even to think to reach out to. This is the time to get those things together, plant those seeds, look for those vision and say, we are the studs that we have been waiting for. We are already here. We are in a safe space for these next couple of days. And if we are those studs and we are the ones with the vision, then the time is now to not just fight the fight to survive, but fight the fight to survive for a vision of a day that we will start to imagine now. That's what we have to do. And if we do that, if we survive, we have that vision, we plant those seeds, then this too shall pass. And when it passes, we will get to a vision that we all can share going forward. Thank you. So I also get the honor or privilege beyond being the president and CEO of Smart Growth America. And I wanted to just quickly say, can you all give a round of applause for the Smart Growth America team? Raise your hand if you're part of the Smart Growth America team. The folks are amazing. It's just an amazing group of folks. And also part of the Smart Growth America team are our board members. So if you're a board member, can you quickly just raise your hand? I won't make you stand. We have board members in the house. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And obviously, Dustin and Jabin already thanked our sponsors, which we always want to thank. No shame in that game. Yes. So I also get the honor and privilege, not only working with Smart Growth America, but knowing my buddy Jerusalem. And Jerusalem and I are buddies, even though it's not like we hang out all the time, but I've been fanboying her over Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, over X. We always used to go back and forth, and then finally met in person. It's like, you should come speak at our summit, speak truth to power. And as I talked about the vision, one of the things that always struck me, one, just the range and breadth of things that Jerusalem can probably talk about off the top of her head. Notice she's going to have no slides. That really shows you how good she is. And two, just the range of things that she's involved in. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with her podcast, Good on Paper. If you haven't, go listen to it. Familiar with her book on the housing crisis. If you haven't read it, don't have it, go get it. But she's going to bring together and weave together so many different things that, will be adjacent, part of that Venn diagram of ideas that really will give us a spark to how to think about, ultimately, how to get to equitable outcomes, whether you're talking about transportation, land use, housing, and the like. But she's also going to push us to say, sometimes we are part of the problem, and therefore we have to first think inwardly and say, what are the things that were not done correctly in order to get to the future? And at SGA, we firmly believe that there's been mediocrity in all the parties. We are ranting against everyone. And Jerusalem is going to do more than just a rant, but she's going to definitely give you a vision and a set of thoughts, and really, as I said earlier, plant the seeds for all of the types of things you'll think about in every panel, in every workshop, and every conversation you have at lunch over the next couple of days. So with that, Jerusalem Demsas.
All right. Does everyone here know that Barack Obama's sketch, The Anger Translator? I'm just bringing it up. So that was a very, very kind introduction. And this is an issue. Housing is an issue. This time moment is an issue that a lot of people have very strong feelings about because it's personal. Everyone has a personal connection to the housing crisis, whether it's your own ability to afford a house, whether it's your ability to afford a quality home, whether it means that you have to give up on certain opportunities to live where you need to live. Where you live structures your entire life. It goes beyond just the cost of housing. It goes to the life that you want to live. Do you want to live in community with your grandparents, in a multi-generational household? Do you want to live in a place that has access to your friends, near a kid's school, near a park, near bike trails, so you can you can experience the outdoors? Housing is central to all of our lives, no matter where we live. So I want to just first recognize that. But I'm going to start where Calvin also started, which is this moment that we're in right now, where we're seeing the rise of the illiberal right in this country. And there's no one explanation for this, and I'm not going to pretend to offer you one explanation. But I do want to focus on one of the closing arguments that President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance made on the campaign trail. And that was about how immigrants were threatening home costs in America. How immigration to this country was at the root of why home prices had skyrocketed. And I'm quoting from J.D. Vance now, 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in this country. There's a theme here, right? This is not the only time an argument like this has been made from liberal factions of the American public and the worldwide liberal parties in the world, right? One of the most popular ads during the 2024 presidential cycle, all of you have heard this, Kamala Harris is for they, them, President Trump is for you. Now, there are ways to interpret a lot of these ads, right? Oh, it's anti-immigration. Oh, he's villainizing trans people. He's trying to demonize people in the LGBTQ community. These things are true. These are not competing explanations. But there's something that I think is even more central to this. All of these arguments say that that people on the liberal side care about small groups of people. They don't care about the broad mess of Americans. And Sarah McBride, who is the first openly transgender member of Congress, said something very similar too. Recently, she said about that ad, it wasn't the surgery part, it wasn't the undocumented immigrant part, it wasn't the trans part, it was the concept that Kamala Harris, according to the ad, was for a small group of people and Donald Trump was for you. Future Forward, which is a Democratic group, said that this was one of the most impactful 30-second ads of the entire campaign. After watching it, viewers moved 2.7 percentage points towards Donald Trump. Now, you can't change the fact that there are people in this country who have views opposing yours on LGBTQ issues, on immigration, all these things. You can move people, things change over time, but you're not going to eradicate these viewpoints in the country. And the most important thing is, when polled, in every single poll, the central issue that everyone cared about was the cost of living. Above immigration, above LGBTQ issues, above education, above anything else, it was the cost of living. And voters are right not to trust liberals on this. It's true. Liberals have failed to care about and address the cost of living seriously. And it's not just about Biden. It wasn't just about inflation in the last term. It was when I look, and anyone looks, at the affordable places to live in this country, they are not governed by Democrats. When you go to places where Republicans haven't governed in years, when you go to California, when you go to Washington State, when you go to New York, you don't find affordable housing accessible to most people. When you look at, the common media narrative about the people who are leaving California and New York is that it's billionaires who are upset about taxes. But when you actually dig into the numbers, the people who are most likely to leave these states are working class and middle class Americans who cite housing costs as their number one reason for leaving. So when a voter shows up and they say, to the polls, and they go, I'm hurting because costs are going up. The biggest cost I pay for every month is my shelter cost, whether it's my mortgage or my rent. And then they ask themselves, in places where Democrats govern, are they showing me that they care at all about making the cost of housing accessible? And where is the proof? Where can you find that? Where are the fastest growing places in this country? They are in Republican-led states that allow homes to get built and permitted at a reasonable clip. It's Florida, it's Texas, Arizona, which now has a Democratic governor, but for many years did not, and has a fully Republican legislature and many Republican leaders up and down the counties and cities, et cetera. And so I think that we need to level set here, because the conversation about housing, about culpability, is often this question just about what have Republicans done to create this problem. But you can't blame Republicans for what's going wrong in California. No one is blocking California state, California counties, California cities and towns from making better choices about housing policy. So why is the cost of housing so high in these places? There are three factors that essentially go in, and I know I'm preaching to the choir a lot here, but please bear with me. There are three factors that essentially go into the cost of housing, right? There's demand, which is often a good thing. People want to live in places run by Democrats, whether it's because there's great weather in California, there's great art and culture and vitality in places like New York and Boston, and also these are welcoming places, and there's places of economic opportunity for people where lots of good jobs are. These are benefits. It is not a bad thing that people want to live in New York or in Denver or in San Francisco or in Seattle. These are positive things. But that does mean there's a lot of people trying to move somewhere and bidding up the cost of housing. Second thing is financing, right? When rates are high, it's hard to make some projects pencil out. But that's never going to be just a function of housing, right? Like, we know that the Federal Reserve is going to care about unemployment and inflation well before they even consider what happens with housing starts. Oh, it's upside down. Oh, okay. Can people hear me? Everything's great. Okay, great. So financing, and that's something where there are a lot of things. Anyone here who works in affordable housing knows the struggle of trying to get projects to pencil out on a timeline that makes sense. It is very, very difficult to do this. But the final thing, and the thing that we have so much control over, is how many homes do we allow to be built in these places, supply. It's not the only thing, but it is the thing that you have a ton of control over permitting, over making it easy to build smaller, more affordable homes, about encouraging that sort of development. These sorts of things, whether it's land use requirements, whether it's building codes, whether it's permitting, the way that cities and counties and states allow for the process by which they tell people, we want you to do this. And anyone who's worked with the government can tell when they sincerely want something to happen, right? Like, you all know, it's not about the words on the page, it's the energy of the people who you work with when you're trying to get something done. Is the principal in the room trying to ensure that this pencils out, this massive 500 affordable home project pencils out? Or is it like, okay, we'll get back to you in 3 weeks when it's been reviewed by X and Y and it's gone through this process and that process? Everyone here knows that there's a difference between a press release that says we're all for affordable housing and a government that actually is trying to make sure that affordable housing gets permitted regardless of the opposition that exists on the ground. We all know what that is. And so for me personally, I'm like sick of people pointing me to press releases when I can go look up the housing starts in their own cities and counties. So the job to housing ratio is something I think I really want to point to here, because I think a lot of the times people will hide behind the fact that the Californias of the world, at the New Yorks of the world are so desirable, right? That there's just no way that you could ever keep up with that sort of demand. They say like, well, of course New York is more expensive than somewhere in Florida or in Texas, et cetera. When you look at the ratio between the number of jobs that are created and the number of houses that are constructed, from 2012 to 2017, San Francisco metro area added 345,000 jobs and just over 20,000 homes. Where are all those people going? They're crowding into homes. I mean, if you've ever visited someone, even someone who's making a good salary in San Francisco, they're living 4 people to a 2-bedroom apartment that should only be for like 2 people. This is even people making over 6 figures. That's what's happening at the top of the rental market. So we know what's going on at the bottom of the rental market. They're also living further away. They're forced to make 2-hour commutes. Or, and this is really, really, really sad, many of them are forced to give up on their communities, give up on potential good jobs, give up on the ability to advance in an area where they feel they want to contribute to the world, because it's not worth it to stay in these places if it costs this much. One of the most impactful studies I've ever read was by Peter Ganong and Daniel Shoag, which is the study that talks about declining, it's going to sound very boring, but I promise it's not, declining interregional mobility. And what they point out is that for a long period of time, if you were, say, a janitor or a lawyer living in rural Alabama, if you moved to New York City, yes, your cost of living would rise, but your income would rise by so much that it would wipe out. the difference. You're definitely making more money. Your real income is increasing. So that means you would make that move. If you were someone from like a declining area, you would move to somewhere that was more productive. You would make more money, you would make more connections, you would have greater social mobility. Your children could go to a different kind of school, be around different sorts of people. There are lots of benefits there. And the place you left, by leaving, you became less of a drain on the resources of that state, which meant that state has more money to give to other people. So it's beneficial to both groups of people, both regions. But at some point, starting in around the 1970s, this calculus begins to shift. By now, if you're a lawyer, it's still a good bet for you to move to New York. It's still a good bet for you to move to California, to any place that has a better job opportunity. Your increase in salary will more than make up for the increase in rent. That is no longer true if you are a blue-collar worker. The increase that you will pay in shelter costs and cost of living so far outweighs that people are choosing to remain where they are. And jobs don't just get created back there. These people are stagnant. They're stuck in communities that don't have the economic opportunity to give to them, and they are watching their potential jobs and futures float by them in other locales. These are smart young kids who want to go to college somewhere but can't afford to pay rent. There are kids who get into UC Berkeley, one of the best schools in the country, in the world, who are homeless in their cars. So, what is it that actually has to be done here? Because this mismatch between jobs and housing is not something that we can just resolve overnight. But there is a lot that can happen on this part of states and localities where most housing policy gets done to make it easier to build lots more housing all the time. Primarily, I'm focused talking about land use regulations, building code regulations, and permitting constraints that make it difficult to build housing. These things sound very boring and technical, but anyone who has ever been involved with trying to get, whether it's an affordable housing project done or a market rate housing project done, knows how many barriers there are to try to get that to fruition. Whether it's a NIMBY problem, where people are opposing it on the ground because they don't like the potential for increased parking and they're worried about their views or whatever it is, or the permitting process is just so onerous and long, it's not possible for you to get capital from the bank in order to sustain that project through the entire term. There are many insidious ways that this develops. And why has this been so pervasive within liberal jurisdictions? I think it's important that there's a lot of soul searching here from a lot of people who have been working in housing policy for a long time. Because a big part of the problem is exactly what Calvin said in his opening. There has been a focus on process over outcomes. When I talk to people in housing, these are not bad people. Most of the people are trying to do really good work. They want to make sure their communities are taken care of. They care a lot about making sure that there's not homelessness in their communities. They want to make sure that people can move there and find a good life, right? So what's going on? When you ask them what gets measured, right? They say, well, we're not trying to create goals of trying to push out a certain amount of housing. We're just trying to make sure we're following all the steps. We don't want to permit housing that doesn't have this specific quality to it. Oh, we want to make sure that we do another study to ensure that there's not some kind of like runoff problem. These are studies in the middle of infill locations where housing has already been developed. This is not developing on greenfield or marshland or anything. These are homes in places that are already zoned for residential, that go through all of these hoops because they are not single-family houses. And I think there has to be some recognition that a lot of this has to do with the fact that many people within the liberal coalition are actually really opposed to new housing being developed. And they're opposed for a few reasons. One, there is a natural suspicion of developers. People are scared that developers are going to come and destroy their communities. That someone's going to come here and get rich, and it's going to destroy the fabric of the community, and it's going to make things worse. I'm not here to pretend that developers have been the best actors in our political society. But the question has to be, why do we hold this to such a different standard than we do to any other thing we care about? No one here is saying that Google is the best actor in society. No one here is saying Facebook is. No one here is saying Apple is. But I bet a lot of you have Apple phones. I bet a lot of you have Google phones and devices in your homes or on you right now. Despite the fact that the private market makes money, we allow these things to get made. But what we don't allow to get made at the reasonable clip is housing. So I think that the developer argument is not one that without merit, but it's one that does not engage with the outcome that's being created. Because when you block developers, right, from making new housing, whether it's affordable housing or market rate housing, the person you're punishing is not the billionaire developer who's already priced in the fact that half his units aren't going to get permitted. That's not who you're hurting. That guy's already rich. You're hurting the people who would one day live in that community. Someone I talked to once said the most moving testimony he'd ever heard at a zoning meeting was when a woman got up to talk about it was a housing project that had some affordable units in it. And she said, years ago I came here to oppose a multifamily project that was in my community, and this was in DC. And then this woman came up to me years later, and we became friends, and I realized she had moved into the building I had opposed. We never hear from the people who eventually live in the housing that would never get built. We don't know what's happened to them. We don't know how their lives have changed as a result, the people they haven't gotten to meet, the homes they haven't been able to create, the schools they didn't get to go to, the jobs they didn't get to take, the innovations they didn't get to be a part of, the fact they didn't get to be a part of the community board, to be a part of the local farmers market. These are entire lives that we are cutting off short because there's fear that a multifamily unit will destroy your community. These are not serious arguments. Now, this is smart growth. So I understand I've talked a lot about supply, and I think that sometimes can feel alienating because people are like, we don't just care about more housing, we want to make sure that it's quality housing. We want to make sure it's connected to people's transportation networks. We want to make sure it is environmentally sound. All of these things are true. I don't think anyone would say we need to throw out every single regulatory framework we have. That would be ridiculous. Of course, we want to build with fair standards. We want to make sure that homes are safe and affordable. But it's really important to know at the basis of most of these regulations has nothing to do with safety or environmental protection. You look at the history of these regulations in this country. In 1910, there are basically no zoning regulations in the entire country. And then an interesting Supreme Court case happens. The Supreme Court case that says, Buchanan v. Warley, where the Supreme Court says you are not allowed to block a white person from selling their home to a black person. Because there were laws in the books, this was one in Kentucky, that said you were not allowed to sell a home to a black person if your block was already more than 50% white. Now after this, all of a sudden, cities discover the use of zoning codes. Obviously, this is not a coincidence. The economist William Fischel finds that the majority of zoning codes before the mid-1910s are about things like light. They're about things like separating out noxious uses, like you don't want pollution next to a kid's park, reasonable stuff. And after that, it becomes about cementing the primacy of single-family homes and separating races and classes from one another. Now, at this point in society, people of color have figured out many, many ways to make money and enter the classes of the middle class and upper class despite all the barriers put in their path. And so now people can say, well, it's not about racism. There are black people that live in Potomac, Maryland. There are Asian American people living in Marin County, California. How can you say it's about racism? This has become a de facto class barrier that disproportionately harms people of color, but is focused on keeping out middle class and poor people from suburbs and nice locations in cities across this country. These are not about preventing harms that we all agree should be stopped. These are not about environmental protection. These are about processes that are blocking people from getting access to good housing. So when someone says to you, oh, we're doing this process because we want to make sure the environment is protected, ask them, what in this process is preventing development from happening in a negative way? Because most of the time, these regulations are just saying you have to fill out a 400-page form, and then once you've done that, you can't be sued. Or if you're sued, you'll probably win. That's not a standard for environmental protection. That's not like the Clean Water Act or Clean Air Act that tells us, you cannot pollute this much. There's no standards that were created in things like local environmental processes. And it's not that the people who are doing this are bad. It's that these are the only tools that they've been given. So when I think about smart growth, right, when I think about, okay, well, yes, we want to build housing, but we want to make sure this is happening and that's happening. I mean, when you have a kid who's failing algebra, you don't tell him to join the cross-country team. If cities and states cannot prove that they can build housing at scale to meet the needs of their communities, we cannot be asking them to do more than just meet that need. And if they have shown they have the ability to do that, then we can start layering on more expectations on them. But I think people need to do some soul searching here. Is it better to have 1,000 new homes, many of which are small, that can meet the needs for many people, or to have 10 new homes that are perfect? Because right now, the bet that every single one of these cities is making is that it's better to have 10 new homes. And the price they're paying is massive homelessness on the streets of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, even rural and mid-sized cities are experiencing this problem as well as the housing crisis makes its way downstream to other markets. There's trade-offs in everything. When someone tries to sell you a bill of goods that you can have a perfect housing market that can produce every single value you care about, they are lying to you. And the people who are paying the price are not in the room. This is an equity summit. And this is a very personal issue to me. I mean, my family, we immigrated here from Ethiopia. We were Eritrean asylum seekers when I was 3 years old. And the place we lived in Maryland, in Montgomery County, Maryland, the townhome that we eventually were able to rent was an inclusionary zoning project. It was a very exclusionary place. I never really thought about it as a kid. I was just like, I guess just all the black people live here. I don't really know what's going on. And it was like, later I looked it up. I was like, why did they allow these townhomes to get developed in this very single family home area? And it was because a few people stood up and said, no, we're going to forcibly ensure that there is some affordable housing being created. And as a result, there was not other housing in that neighborhood or community, or anywhere near that neighborhood or community, that we would have afforded. It just did not exist. And then when my parents divorced when I was in high school, there was a real concern. They were like, okay, well, we have to pay for 2 homes now, right? It's very, very expensive. Divorce is actually one of the common predictors for people ending up in homelessness because it's so costly on a household to divide that up. And there was a real concern, like, how are we going to stay in the school we got into? My sister and I were at this magnet school. We really didn't want to leave. It was really important to us to stay there. And at the same time, we didn't want to lose our relationships with our parents. We wanted to be able to see both of them. Because there was a pro-housing city council in Rockville, Maryland, that had developed apartment buildings within walking distance of the high school that I went to, is the only reason I was able to live with both of my parents at the same time. That I was able to go stay in the school I went to. I was able to stay in that magnet program, go to the college I wanted to go to, and finish the life that I wanted to lead and end up where I am right now. You can't plan for that. You can't know that one day there will be a little girl wanting to stay in her school, and so you need to make sure there's an apartment building near Richard Montgomery High School. No one's doing that. That's impossible. What you have to do is make sure that there is an abundance of housing available in multiple different types, such that when there is a crisis in a family, when there is a problem that people confront all the time, where they lose a job or have a medical event, that it's easy to downsize. AARP in the last few years has gotten into the issue of housing zoning reform because they've realized they have a lot of seniors who are stuck in place on the first floor of their homes. Sometimes they can't even access the bathroom because there's only a bathroom on the second floor. But they can't downsize without losing their community because there's no smaller, more affordable housing unit in their entire area. And sometimes it's the very people that oppose multifamily development in their communities that are facing this problem. And we shouldn't have schadenfreude over this. It's not like, oh, we're making fun of them for like, oh, now the chickens have come home to roost. It's not funny. It's sad, and it's a sad reality that it's hard to know who's going to benefit from that house in the future. You don't know who's going to move in there day one, let alone 3 years down the line, 20 years down the line. It could be your kid. It could be your niece. It could be someone who becomes your kid's best friend. We don't know. So as liberals, this question is, are we going to have the posture that, given that uncertainty, we want more housing to be built, or that every housing unit has to prove itself worthy before it gets a permit? So I also think that when we're talking about equity here, that equity is impossible under conditions of scarcity. For a couple of reasons. One, rich people are going to get housing. They're going to get housing. They're going to get it. It doesn't matter if there's 10 houses available or 1 million houses available. The people you will not find out on the streets are rich people. And we know this, right? I visited my sister once when she's a software engineer. She chose a much more lucrative career than journalism. Good for her. And, we're not bitter over here. She and her partner, they were living in New York City in Brooklyn, and I would go to visit them. And I was like, my sister, my God, she makes so much money. It's gonna be so nice to go stay with her. It's gonna be a luxury. I'm so excited. And I would show up, and I was like, what is wrong with this place? I would show up, and I was like, the stairs were not regulation size. It wasn't ADA compliant. She was telling me they had to suddenly rush out with their cats one day because the carbon monoxide was going off and the detectors weren't working. And I was just like, you make so much money. Why are you living like this? And that's the reality, of course, of the New York City housing market, that people who are making very good incomes are not able to access high quality housing, but they are housed. They are housed. She was not at risk of losing her housing. And so the question has to be, when we're thinking about equity, how do we make sure there's enough to go around? Because there is no legislation that will force a rich person to give up their home so a poor person can move in. If you only think about these things in terms of redistribution and not in terms of growing the amount that is available, you are creating frictions. And you create these frictions not just between the groups. You may think that you should be creating them between the rich and the poor. You're creating them often amongst the groups that should be in solidarity with one another. I started talking about the immigration and housing problem in the 2024 election. In Chicago, we saw how this plays out in a majority black city. We saw that Black Chicagoans were so frustrated by the migrant crisis and the perception that immigrants were getting access to resources, and the truth that many of them were getting access to resources that many Black Chicagoans thought they would benefit from. And this is insane. We are the wealthiest country at the wealthiest time in history. We have the ability. It's not a strange new technology to build an apartment building. It's not something we haven't figured out. We know how to do this. But instead of doing that, we allow these communities to turn against one another. We prefer that friction. Then the discomfort of going, okay, I guess our view is changing. Okay, I guess things will look a little different in this neighborhood. Okay, maybe a developer made some money. But most importantly, all of the types of housing programs that we all cherish, whether it's expanding vouchers or building public housing, social housing, none of these are possible under a regime that does not allow housing to be built easily. There's a really great study that the Roosevelt Institute just put out. It was an essay by Paul Williams, who works on trying to build social housing in this country. And he was looking at what happens, because when you get a voucher, you have a certain amount of time before you have to give it back if you're not able to find an apartment. And in areas where there's a lot of housing, people are significantly more likely to be able to utilize that voucher. And in others where housing is constrained, they get the voucher, the golden ticket they've been waiting for to finally afford housing, and they have to return it. So if we pit equity against supply, against growth, equity will lose, and growth will lose. These things go together, and anyone trying to tell you that trying to build more housing, trying to make it easier to build more housing, doesn't care about equity, either doesn't understand what they're talking about or is lying to you. This issue is not just about the very big crises of homelessness and affordability that we're facing as a country. Under conditions of scarcity, illiberalism wins. It turns even good progressive people into afraid and exclusionary members of society. 47% of Massachusetts residents, very liberal state, voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It was, I think, the only state not to vote for Ronald Reagan. 47% of Massachusetts residents responded in a poll last year saying they agreed that migrants were taking up housing that should go to real Americans. We can't build a politics out of saying those are all bad people. They are looking around their communities and realizing their scarcity. They may not know why it's happening, but they know there's not enough housing for them and their families. They're sure as hell not going to accept other people. So if you care about equity, if you care about expanding the pie, if you care about making it possible for more people to live comfortably in this country, the first most important thing is to care about growth and building as much as is possible to meet the needs of Americans. Thank you.
Question here? Hi, really nice to meet you, Jerusalem. My name is Patrick Spence. I work for the National Association of Counties. for obvious reasons, what I'm about to ask you is going to be as a private citizen and not as a representation of local government. So I think essentially what you're getting at, right, is the so-called abundance agenda, the idea that for liberalism to deliver on outcomes, we have to move in a broadly deregulatory direction on housing and on other issues. And I hope everyone in this room finds that persuasive. My question for you, right, is we're pointing at a direction, right? Less red tape, more housing, more development, and so on. Say we get there, I'm curious to know, and because I like to stir the pot, maybe split the room a little, what does an ideal regulatory environment look like? And like, to put some real stakes on it, let's use California as an example. The California Environmental Quality Act. Should it be repealed completely? Should it be reformed? Should we have carve-outs for projects? The Coastal Commission. Do we do a permitting shot clock? Or should the state preempt zoning completely from cities and counties and just allow it by all development by right? Like, where do we get the balance if we're moving, in your ideal direction?
Yes. Can you guys hear me? Is this working? Okay, great. So great question, and it's from you. I promise. I know. So I think a few things. One is I'm going to answer your question specifically, but I also want to sit on this word deregulatory, because it's a choice to think about it as deregulation or regulating for what you want. Is it deregulatory to say that only single-family homes are allowed? And now we say, actually, single-family homes are allowed, and also duplexes are allowed, and also townhomes are allowed. Is that, I don't know, I mean, you can say it's deregulation, but I think you're regulating for what you want to get built. I think we're regulating towards a future you want to build. And there's a choice to make this. I mean, of course, there are a lot of people in this coalition who consider themselves like libertarians, who are going to use that language, people who consider themselves on the right, who like to see this as a validation of their views on many cases. Fine, big tent. I'm glad they see it that way. The way I see it is that I think that we should build a lot of different types of housing to accommodate all the kinds of lives that should exist. That if my friends want to live together, and I have two couples that I know that want to live together and raise their children together, there are homes that make that possible. That it's not a fight that they have to have with a bank to get them to get a mortgage in that way. It's very, very difficult for people to live in new and interesting and diverse ways, multi-generational ways, single people to live in ways that actually meet their needs without having to buy a massive house that doesn't fit what you want in order to live in the area you want to live in, all these sorts of things. So to me, this is about freedom. And if someone wants to think about that as deregulation, all power to them. But I want to be clear here because I think that can be an alienating word in liberal spaces. There's always regulation. You're either regulating towards one thing or another. So, but then more specifically on your question, yeah. So I mean, personally, I believe a few things. One, I believe when we look at environmental regulations in standards rather than process. These are blunt force, right? But have standards. What is unacceptable for modular housing? What is an acceptable way for a modular house to be built? I don't care if California does that. I don't care if they have a national building codes. I don't care if HUD does a study and they put it out and say, these are clear standards for what is a safe building. Right now, lots of localities just adopt the national building code because they're terrified of creating a problem, rightly so. You don't want to create the liability in a house that's going to create safety hazards for other people. So instead of doing that, subject all of the regulations right now on the books to that analysis. Are you actually providing safety? Are you actually providing for environmental protection? Are you creating a standard for this? If we're talking about areas where we don't want development, just block those off. If it's not an area for residential development, that should just be blocked off by the state. There should be clear boundaries. We don't want to be building in Yosemite. No one wants that. And so creating clear standards for developers, because most times I talk to developers, whether it's affordable housing or private market developers, what they say is, we could deal with a whole litany of standards. Especially if you're talking about New York City or San Francisco, where the demand is so high for housing, they just need certainty. They need to know if they decide they want to build a project, that there's like a checklist, and they just follow those rules, and then you get to go. Because then when you go to your capital investors, you can say to them, this will get built. It's not a maybe, maybe not situation where now you have to make a massive bet on that outcome. So I think that like those principles are important. And then when I think about like in general, like how I would apply it to various things, there is no reason to have parking minimums in any part of this country. There's just no argument for it. Similarly, minimum lot sizes. I don't think there should be a single minimum lot size in the entire country. And people in this room clearly know this. It does not mean that bigger houses won't get built. But it means that smaller houses can finally get built. So things like that, I think they're pretty clear. There's no justification for it. I think other things like FAR requirements or whatever, I still think there are setbacks or these things. I mean, there's no justification for these to exist. But if we are going to do it, I think my general principle around this sort of thing is that this sort of action needs to move to the state level. I really like the action that's happening right now, and I know you're at the county, so you hate this, but but I just don't believe that you can have all these different zoning codes going from county to county, city to city. I would love for counties and cities to come to the table and help craft that. That seems like a great situation. They often know a lot of things that are going to be more hot button than others. They're going to cause more of a fight than others. That's great. They should be part of the conversation. But at the same time, if we're talking about things like, why can't we see more innovation? I mean, construction productivity is so on the decline. Why don't we see more innovation in construction and development? Why don't we see that happening? Well, if you want to be a developer, anyone who hasn't done this already, try to imagine how you would build a home in some of these places. It would take you years to get up to par, to know how to even get a project through. And that means you have to be personally wealthy or have access to a massive amount of capital, which means new developers. I mean, this is a competitive problem. This is an oligopolistic problem. New competitors have trouble getting into the development space. When California finally passes like 30 years of additional dwelling unit ADU legislation, and they finally start to see ADUs getting built. I mean, it takes 30 years of laws because localities keep saying, well, yeah, you can build an ADU as long as you have 7 parking spaces, And then, of course, nothing gets built. And then they finally are like, okay, none of that. That's the whack-a-mole that they were doing for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And then they finally get it built, and you see now 1 in 5 California homes permitted is an ADU. 20% of new homes being built in the largest, most prosperous state is only allowed because of 30 years of fighting with localities. Sorry, I could keep going. You have to cut me off. Okay. I got called out.
And that's it. There's 4, and that's all we have time for.
Sorry.
Okay. I'm Ryan Dorsey, City Council member in Baltimore. Really glad to be here. My question comes down to, what do I got to do to get the two of you to come and talk to my colleagues on the City Council exactly the way you did? And this is an earnest question, seriously, because I'm one of 15 City Council members and I'm one of 13,000 employees of the City of Baltimore, and there aren't any of those others here in this room right now. And we have a package of bills on bulk and yard standards, repealing all of our off-street parking requirements, single-stair reform, and multifamily housing by right, all coming in next month. And I need for other people to not put the press release before the change that we actually need and what they actually support.
I mean, oh my God, hi, Sonia.
Wherever her people say she needs to go, I'll go.
I'm not even in charge of my schedule.
By the way, anybody, he made a single stair reference. You should Google this. Going back to Jerusalem's point about, does the rule actually create safety? Most building codes require double staircases. And it turns out there was just a recent study that it actually doesn't make it any safer to have double staircases. You can have single stair construction, which would dramatically reduce costs and time to get development. And so that's an example of you actually assess the regulation and is it doing the thing that you think it's doing? And half the time, it wasn't. So just.
And you can have family-sized apartments when you get rid of the second stairwell. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Okay. Sam Diaz from 1000 Friends of Oregon. So we've been removing some of the bans on exclusionary zoning. Thank you for coming to Yimbitown, Jerusalem. It's so great to see you again. What we're experiencing is we have the land, we've streamlined some of the permitting, and for private development in particular, they want to build, period. They don't want to keep building. And so it's an advantage for them to have this supply issue because their price point is higher. And so at least that's the theory we're having in our coalitions. And so I'm curious if you're seeing any policies or I guess the regulation the other way to incentivize the private builders to keep building so we can actually reach the abundance in these location efficient places.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. You're saying that they have built a lot, but then they've stopped building?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Is there another, or should we go? Okay.
Final question. Sure.
Hi, my name's Scott Wolf. I'm Executive Director of Grow Smart Rhode Island in Providence. I'm also a 20-year veteran of the Providence Zoning Board, just to give you a little context for my question. I know one of the tenets of the smart growth movement is to encourage maximum public participation in rulemaking and decision making. How does that potentially negatively impact the abundance agenda? And what can we do to continue to have adequate public participation, but not overkill on public participation?
I'm just going to move my chair over for this one.
I'm going to burst.
Good luck with that.
Is that it? Is that the sort of questions? Or do we have one more? Okay, so we're good? Okay, great. Okay, so feel free to reach out, and we can maybe make something work. And then, yes, okay, there's a question about development. So as I mentioned, there are two other things that constrain housing development. One is demand, the other is financing. And right now, rates are really high, expensive. And right now, the regulatory environment for many years has told developers and it has told banks that the thing you should get used to, you should get used to underwriting is single-family homes on large lots of land, and maybe you can do a smaller single-family home. That seems kind of similar. But, you want to do like modular construction? I'm not giving you a good terms on that. You want to do ADUs, or what's a triplex? Like, there's no law restraining the bank from this, right? But they're just like scared because they're like, they don't want to take a risk. And also on modular, maybe it's good not to take a risk. Maybe there's a reason why it's a more risky endeavor. So these things are going to be constraining outside of the control of most policymakers. Oregon has done a lot of great stuff, but there are still a lot of laws in the books that still have not been repealed and pulled back. And it is a multi-year, multi-decade effort to remake and re-incentivize changes in the private market. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a couple of years. I know it's like this is one of the political problems facing this movement is that it does not work on the electoral timelines that fit for most people. But I think there are a few things that can be done. One is that I think that you should try and see if there have been new developers who have entered into the Oregon and Portland housing space and see what they're doing. Those folks are often the ones who are more innovative. They're trying new things, figure out what it is that makes it pencil for them when they're looking at their projects. What's making it not pencil? Is it the timeline, something like that? Often developers will just tell you the reason why the last thing didn't work, but it's not that prescriptively helpful. But if you talk to new developers, they often can give you that information. Talk to affordable housing developers too. I'm sure you're doing this as well. But you talk to affordable housing developers too. There are ways in which maybe it's the fact that they have to layer all these different types of financing in order to be able to make it work, and they can't hold on to the land that long, or the things that the city can do on land acquisition to help them to hold on to that for a long period of time. And finally, I mentioned Paul Williams when I was talking. Part of the reason why you want to invest in, Montgomery County is doing this, Atlanta, Georgia might be doing this too. You want to invest in a revolving fund so the state can be funding this development, is that it can be countercyclical. When rates are high, the state can still just kind of be putting that money in and pushing development forward, and that will also push other developers to see this is a time to do this. But if we're talking about getting to real amounts of home building, this is like a snowball going down a hill. It starts building and it creates momentum. But honestly, people were saying this about ADUs. They were saying, well, you legalized ADUs in 1980-something, and nothing's getting built. There are a lot more regulations outside of literally what's on the books that are constraining development, often in ways that are unseen. In Minneapolis, when they got rid of single-family zoning for the first time, you saw no triplexes built. Everyone was freaking out about this, and basically none of them get built at all. And what ends up happening is, the city gets together, they put together bunch of permitting reforms, they get rid of parking minimums, all this sort of stuff, and all of a sudden now you see multiplexes being built, you see transit-oriented development happening, et cetera, because it just takes more than just that one line in the books, which I know you know a lot of this, but just to reaffirm that, it is not surprising that it's taking multiple years particularly through an era of high rates right now. What you want to be ready for is that when low rates hit, like they did in 2020, that a bunch can get built really quickly. And a bunch of that can get built where you want it to be built and how you want it to get built. Because that's what happened in 2021. All of it got built in Georgia, it got built in Texas as sprawl. Arizona, sprawl. So, yes. Final question about community participation. This is one of my hobby horses. I have a few thoughts about this. One is there is this dichotomy that says community participation versus not listening to the community. That's not what's happening here. It is actually one type of allowing anyone who wants to show up and yell about stuff versus actually empowering represented officials to see what their community actually wants. And what do I mean by this? Who shows up to community meetings? We actually have research about this, but I don't need to give you the research. You've seen it. It's not the community. It is a community, but it is a very disproportionate group. And it's not just on the traditional stuff, right? Like, it's not just the stuff where it's most likely homeowners, it's older people, it's white people, it's richer people. That's all true. But it's also just the kinds of people who are going to be opposed to stuff. Like, really. Like, just think about it in your own life. It's rational, right? Like, if I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like to see a new park built. That'd be nice. I'm not going to show up and scream about that. But if I really don't want to see that park built, I'm definitely showing up. People love to be angry. And these rooms present the opportunity for people to see themselves in opposition to any sort of development. The framework that they're presented with is not how do you want to imagine your city. It's yes or no to this project. Here's a developer. They're presented like a lamb for slaughter. and now, I literally saw one cry one time. It was actually crazy. But they're presented like lamb for slaughter, and then you get to yell at them. And that's it. And it's also unfair from the community perspective, because you're not being asked to dream bigger about where you live. You're just being asked to say yes or no. And if you're not sure, you're always going to go no. Why would you choose change? Things are pretty good for you. So I think the question is first, are these community meetings actually ensuring that we're getting all the voices need to be heard? No. Are they empowering us to make the decisions that people want you to make? Because while the same people are yelling at you about the new development of affordable housing that's trying to be built, they're also angry about the cost of housing going up. They're also angry about the fact that there's not a transit station going up where they want it to go, that there's not a bus line that's convenient for them. They're angry about the fact that they can't put rooftop solar on their house or whatever it is. They're mad about a bunch of stuff. The role of elected officials is not just to say, oh, someone's yelling at me, let me just do what they say. It's to mediate across a bunch of different concerns and come to a synthesis that makes sense. This synthesis does not make sense. People are not happy. Even the NIMBYs aren't happy. And so to me, when I think about community participation, it's yeah, of course. We're in a democracy. We want people to engage and we want to hear what they're saying, which is why I think there needs to be a lot more use, and that we're seeing this now, of surveys, actually surveying communities. In my own job, half of what I do is I'll just go around a development and I'll just walk to all the houses and just ask people what they hear about it. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. They think I'm a crazy lady. I'm like, have you heard? They're turning the park into homes. They're like, I don't care. Stop talking to me. Quite literally. No one knows what I'm talking about every time. And yet it's oh, the community is in uproar. And so, really forcing elected officials, everyone to, whether it's canvassing, whether it's actually looking at survey data, but then also, that's part of why you move things up to the state level rather than keeping it localized. Because the impacts of whether housing is built in a local area are not just going to be felt locally, they're felt regionally, they're felt nationally. And so you need to include the voices of more people than just the people who live around that development. And so to me, community participation is not yes or no, good or bad. This is not community participation. It is, we are selling our future to the highest bidder and the loudest shouter.